I favored my daughter over my 3 sons and allowed harsh treatment in our home. All 3 cut me off, and when my oldest son got married without inviting her, I took her side and everything exploded. I have 4 kids, 3 sons and 1 daughter. The boys are all adults now. My daughter is the youngest. From the time they were little, the difference between them was obvious. My sons were loud, physical, impulsive. They fed off each other's energy and escalated everything. My daughter was sensitive, emotional, easily overwhelmed. She cried easily, shut down easily, and took things personally in a way the boys never did. Anyone who lived in that house could see it. Because of that, I parented them differently. I don't see how that's controversial. When the boys fought, they fought hard. When my daughter was upset, she withdrew. That meant consequences had to look different. The boys responded to discipline. My daughter responded to reassurance. Yes, my sons were punished more, sometimes together, sometimes for things that started small and spiraled because they couldn't regulate themselves. If my daughter ended up crying or panicking, I stepped in. That's my job as a parent. I'm not going to ignore a child who's clearly distressed just to make things equal. We use things like chores, grounding, and separation. If the boys were told to stay in their rooms or not speak to each other for a while, it wasn't cruelty. It was to cool things down. Silence was used because arguments in that house turned ugly fast. My daughter was never hit. The boys were spanked when they were younger. Yes, because that was the only thing that got through to them at the time. People can judge that all they want now, but I was dealing with 3 boys who were bigger, stronger, and constantly pushing boundaries. I've seen some people online call this favoritism. I don't agree. I call it reality. Boys need consequences. Girls internalize pain. Treating them exactly the same would have been lazy parenting. As they got older, things didn't improve. My sons started seeing themselves as victims. Every argument turned into, "You always take her side." Every punishment became proof in their minds that they were somehow oppressed. I didn't coddle that mindset. I told them life isn't fair and families don't revolve around hurt egos. One by one, they moved out, and one by one, they stopped calling. No big blow-up, no final argument, just distance. Holidays became excuses, birthdays became texts, then nothing. I didn't chase them. I don't believe in begging grown men to be part of a family they clearly resent. My daughter, on the other hand, became more anxious as they left. She blamed herself. She worried they hated her. I reassured her because that's what a mother does. Everything finally came to a head this year when my oldest son got married. I didn't know he was engaged. I didn't know there was a date. I found out through photos someone tagged online. A small wedding apparently. New wife, smiling faces, no mother, no sister. I was shocked. But what hurt more was seeing that my daughter wasn't there. He didn't just exclude me. He excluded her. On purpose. When I confronted him, he was cold, detached. He said it was simpler this way and that he didn't want drama. I asked him directly why his sister wasn't invited and he refused to explain. That told me everything I needed to know. My daughter was devastated. She cried the entire drive home after seeing the pictures. She kept asking what she did wrong. I couldn't answer that because frankly, she didn't do anything. I drove to his house unannounced. I wanted to talk face to face like adults. He wouldn't let us in. He stood in the doorway and told us to leave. His wife didn't even come out. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. I've supported my sons financially when they needed it, helped with school, helped with rent when they were younger. I've been painted as this monster when all I did was try to raise functional adults. If my oldest wants to erase his sister and treat her like an inconvenience, I don't see why I should continue supporting him in any way. I've told family members exactly what happened. Some of them think I should let it go. Others think his wife is influencing him. All I know is that my daughter was deliberately hurt, and I won't apologize for standing up for her. Am I wrong for cutting him off financially after this? Update 1. I didn't expect the reaction my original post got. I know people on Reddit tend to jump to extremes, but I honestly thought there would be more balance. Instead, I'm being told I'm abusive, controlling, and that my sons escaped me, which feels dramatic and unfair. That said, a lot has happened since I posted, and things have escalated faster than I expected, so I'm updating for context before people keep filling in gaps with assumptions. After the wedding situation, I couldn't just sit with it. The silence from my oldest son felt intentional, like he wanted to erase not just me, but his sister entirely. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to understand how it got to the point where excluding her felt acceptable to him. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that this wasn't just about childhood issues. This was about outside influence, and a narrative being built about our family that painted my daughter as the problem and my sons as victims. I decided to reach out to his wife's family. I know people are already going to say that was crossing a line, but from my perspective, they were now part of the situation whether they liked it or not. They welcomed my son into their family. They hosted the wedding. They watched my daughter be excluded and said nothing. I sent a long email explaining our family history, how my daughter struggled emotionally growing up, and how my sons could be aggressive and dismissive toward her. I included screenshots of old messages and arguments to show patterns of behavior. Nothing was taken out of context. It was proof. I didn't accuse anyone directly. I simply explained that my daughter had been emotionally harmed for years and that the wedding exclusion reopened old wounds. I made it clear I was disappointed that no one thought to question whether cutting her out was cruel. Around the same time, I started posting on Facebook, not naming names, but writing about what it's like to be a mother whose children rewrite history once they're adults. I talked about how sons abandon mothers, how women are expected to absorb everyone else's pain quietly, and how speaking up gets labeled as manipulation. A lot of people reacted. Some agreed, some didn't. My daughter shared the posts, which I appreciated, because at least someone wasn't pretending this was normal. What pushed things further was when I found out more about the wedding itself. It wasn't as small as my son claimed. There were friends there. There was extended family on his wife's side. There was room for people he wanted there, just not us. That felt deliberate. I contacted a couple of the vendors listed on the wedding site. I didn't demand money back outright. I explained that immediate family had been excluded without explanation and that the situation caused significant emotional distress. I asked what options existed for complaints or partial refunds. Apparently, that got back to my son because I received a message shortly after accusing me of harassment and threatening legal action if I contacted anyone else connected to the wedding. That's when he mentioned a restraining order for the first time. I think people hear that phrase and assume there's violence involved. There isn't. I've never hurt my children as adults. I raised my voice sometimes. I disciplined them when they were kids. That's it. But now suddenly I'm being treated like some kind of threat because I won't quietly accept being erased. Something else came up in the comments that I want to address because people are twisting it. Yes, there were times when I didn't tell my sons every medical detail when they were younger. When one of them had tests done or was being monitored for something minor, I didn't see the point in stressing them out. They were already anxious kids. I handled it. That's what parents do. Somehow that's being framed as neglect now, which feels ridiculous. As for Reddit, the tone has shifted completely. People aren't asking questions anymore. They're accusing. They're diagnosing. They're telling me my daughter is manipulative and that I encouraged it, which is insulting. I defended her. I corrected behavior that needed correcting. If that makes people uncomfortable, so be it. I'll admit I responded harshly to some comments. It's hard not to when strangers reduce your entire life to a few paragraphs and decide you're a monster. I didn't come here to be insulted. I came here to ask if I was wrong for standing by my daughter when she was clearly hurt. At this point, my oldest son has stopped responding entirely. I'm blocked. His wife has blocked me as well. Family members are choosing sides, and it's becoming clear who believes the version of events where I'm the villain and who remembers what things were actually like in that house. I still don't think cutting us out of his wedding was justified, and I don't think staying silent would have fixed anything. If defending my daughter publicly makes people uncomfortable, that says more about them than me. More has come out since then, especially about what my sons have been saying behind my back, but that's a whole other issue. I'll explain that next. Update 2. My sons have a group chat. All 3 of them. The name of it is taken from a phrase I used when they were younger, during discipline. It was something I said when things were getting out of control and they needed to stop escalating. To them, apparently, it's a symbol. They've turned it into a joke, a badge of survival. That alone should tell you how distorted their perspective is. What bothered me more was what they've been sharing in that chat. Old emails, voice recordings, notes they wrote as teenagers, things taken completely out of context and presented as evidence of abuse. Normal parenting moments turned into horror stories. Decisions made under stress, reframed as calculated cruelty. I'm being dissected by my own children like I'm a case study. They've even involved their spouses and friends, which explains a lot about why conversations suddenly feel rehearsed and why I'm being spoken to like a defendant instead of a mother. I called it revisionist history because that's exactly what it is. They're adults now, with adult language and adult resentment, projecting that back onto a childhood that was far more complicated than they're willing to admit. None of them mention how chaotic they were together. None of them mention how often my daughter was overwhelmed or frightened. They've erased her completely from their narrative, except as a prop. That part became clearer when my daughter and I talked more openly about the past. She admitted things that people here are already twisting in the worst way possible. Yes, she sometimes asked me to step in. Yes, she told me when something felt unfair or when she felt targeted. Sometimes she exaggerated because she didn't have the words to explain what she was feeling. Sometimes she panicked and said things she didn't fully mean. That's what anxious kids do. There were moments where she told me she didn't feel safe emotionally and that if nothing changed, she didn't know how she'd cope. People are calling that manipulation. I call it a child crying for help. I wasn't going to ignore that just to keep my sons comfortable. One specific incident keeps being brought up, so I'll address it myself. Years ago, there was a school event where my sons had embarrassed my daughter publicly. Teachers were involved, other parents were watching. I made them apologize to her in front of everyone, not to humiliate them, but to correct behavior in the same space where it happened. Accountability doesn't work if it's hidden. I stand by that. It taught them that actions have consequences beyond the home. Extended family doesn't see it that way anymore. Since my last post, several relatives reached out, not to ask how I was doing, but to confront me. They said my sons had shared their experiences and that I needed to take responsibility. Responsibility for what exactly? They couldn't explain without repeating the same emotionally loaded language I've already seen online. When I pushed back, when I explained my reasoning and reminded them of what they witnessed themselves over the years, the tone changed. Suddenly I was defensive. Suddenly I was the problem. It became clear that loyalty mattered more than truth. So I cut contact. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't post about it. I just stopped responding. I'm not going to sit in conversations where I'm treated like a villain for refusing to abandon my daughter to make everyone else feel better. What's frustrating is that people keep acting like I'm hiding something. I'm not. I'm being honest about what happened in my house. I'm just not willing to accept the version where everything was abuse and nothing was context. My sons want control of the narrative now, and they've found an audience willing to give it to them. Fine. But I won't participate in my own character assassination quietly. At this point, the family lines are clear. There's no neutral ground left. What worries me more is how emboldened my sons have become, and how far they seem willing to go to make sure I'm permanently painted as the enemy. That's where things are heading, and it doesn't feel accidental. There's more happening behind the scenes, especially on the legal side, and my daughter is struggling with the pressure of being dragged into something she never asked for. I'll explain that next, because that's where this really starts to spiral. Update 3. I didn't want to post this soon, but after my last update, all 3 of my sons sent a cease and desist letter through a lawyer. It wasn't just about me contacting them directly. It listed social media posts, messages to extended family, and what they called ongoing harassment. They also demanded I stop discussing their childhood publicly, including on Reddit. I want to be clear, I did not see this as a reasonable request. From my perspective, they are trying to silence me so they can control the narrative. Everything I've shared is my lived experience as their mother. I'm not inventing things. I'm explaining context that they refuse to acknowledge. I responded through my own attorney. I told them that cutting off a parent without cause can be considered abandonment later in life, and that I would not hesitate to explore legal options if they continued to erase me. I also warned them that if they kept portraying themselves as victims, I would be forced to clarify certain incidents from their childhood that they would rather keep private. I'm not threatening them for fun, I'm protecting myself. Around the same time, my daughter's behavior started to change in ways that even I can't fully ignore. She's always been sensitive and reactive, but lately her emotions have been sharper. She gets angry faster and doesn't calm down the way she used to. She's been lashing out at people she thinks are against us. At a family gathering I still attended before cutting off more relatives, she slapped one of her cousins after accusing them of siding with the boys. I removed her immediately and didn't make excuses to anyone there, but privately I understood where it came from. She feels cornered. She feels like she's being erased the same way I am. I later found out she had sent multiple messages to my oldest son's wife. They weren't polite. They weren't productive. They were emotional and intense. People keep calling them threats, but I see them as panic responses from someone who has spent her whole life being told she was too fragile to survive betrayal. When you raise a child knowing the world will hurt them, you don't act surprised when they react badly to that hurt. Instead of seeing this as a sign that I failed, I see it as proof that my daughter has been pushed too far. At this point, my sons have stopped pretending they want space and are openly trying to punish me. They've contacted extended family, old friends, and even neighbors. People I haven't spoken to in years suddenly feel comfortable telling me I was abusive. These are people who weren't in my home, didn't raise my children, and didn't deal with the daily chaos of 3 boys and 1 emotionally delicate girl under the same roof. I've cut off anyone who repeats those accusations. Loyalty matters to me. Silence is one thing. Siding against me is another. Because of all this, I made a decision people are going to hate. I changed my will. Everything I own will now go to my daughter. The house, my savings, personal items, everything. I didn't do this out of spite. I did it because she is the only one who has stayed. She is the only one who hasn't erased me, blocked me, or treated me like a liability. I sent copies of the updated will to my sons so there would be no confusion later. I told them it was for closure, not punishment. They made their choices. I made mine. Their reaction was exactly what you'd expect. More accusations, more talk of control and manipulation. Not one of them asked how I was doing or whether I felt safe. Not one of them acknowledged the years I spent holding this family together while everyone else pulled away. Since then, the comments here have turned almost completely against me. I've been called names I won't repeat. People keep using words like abuse and control as if discipline and structure are crimes. There is a final update. About 2 weeks ago, I came home and realized my daughter wasn't there. At first, I didn't panic. She's an adult and has stayed with friends before when things felt overwhelming. What was different was that she hadn't told me, hadn't left a note, and wasn't answering her phone. By the next morning, I knew something was wrong. Her room was stripped down to almost nothing. Clothes gone, personal items gone, things she'd always kept close, even during arguments, gone. The only thing left behind was a single envelope on the kitchen counter with my name on it. I won't share the letter word for word. I'm not doing that to her or myself, but I will explain what it said because people keep assuming she was taken from me or manipulated. She wasn't. The letter wasn't emotional in the way I expected. There were no apologies, no blame directed outward. It was calm, almost clinical, which somehow made it worse. She wrote that she was cutting contact completely and that she didn't want me to look for her or try to explain myself again. She said she was never as fragile as I believed, that she learned early on that being delicate gave her protection, attention, and control. She admitted she leaned into it because it worked, because it gave her power in a house where the boys were bigger and louder. She said I rewarded that behavior, even if I didn't realize I was doing it. Then the hardest part to read was her saying that she didn't think I loved her for who she actually was, that I loved having someone to protect, someone to stand behind, someone who justified my anger toward everyone else. She wrote that I needed enemies, and when there weren't any, I helped create them. She ended the letter by saying she didn't want to live inside this story anymore, that she was tired of being the reason things happened. She said she was leaving before she became someone she didn't recognize. Since then, she hasn't contacted me. I don't know where she is. I know she's safe because I was informed of that through a third party, but that's it. She has asked for no further contact, and I've been told very clearly that trying to reach her would only confirm everything she wrote. My sons remain no contact. That hasn't changed. If anything, this confirmed their position. I heard through family that they see this as proof that I damaged all of them in different ways. I don't agree with that framing, but I can't stop them from believing it. Extended family is gone as well. People I thought would eventually come around have stopped answering calls. I'm not invited to holidays anymore. I've been removed from group chats I didn't even know existed. I found out about a family gathering recently through social media, which felt familiar in a way I didn't appreciate. I'm alone now, in a very literal sense. No daily calls, no updates, no one checking in. I wake up and go to sleep without managing anyone else's emotions for the first time in decades. It's quiet. People online keep saying that sounds like peace. It doesn't feel like that to me. It feels like being erased slowly but thoroughly. I've read comments saying this is what I deserve, that this is justice. I don't see it that way. From my perspective, I did what I thought was necessary at every stage. I made hard choices. I didn't always get it right, but I didn't act with malice. I acted with intention. I won't pretend I understand my daughter's letter completely. I think she's rewriting things to cope, just like my sons are. People do that when they want distance without guilt. I accept that they need space, even if I don't agree with their version of events. This will be my last update. There's nothing left to explain or defend. My children have made their decisions. The rest of the family followed. All I can do now is live with what's left and trust that time will eventually put things in a different light. I still believe I did what I thought was right with the information I had at the time, even if no one else does.